Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? There you go. Got a little response there, a little feedback. Well, I want to welcome everybody to the cost efficiency panel this afternoon. Thanks for being here. My name is Blake Chisholm. I work for AWS in our professional services team and lead our global programs. You are in the right spot. We've got an exciting panel. We've got a lot of things that have to do with cost efficiency from a lot of different areas in public sector, and I think you're gonna really enjoy your time. At the end of the session, we're gonna have a couple of minutes for Q&A, so if you have a really interesting question that applies to all of our panelists, be prepared, and as we get to the end, I'll signal and we'll get you up here for a question. So, without further ado, I'm gonna turn it over to our panelists, have each one of them introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about their organization, what they're doing with the cloud, and we'll get started. So, Jay?
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jay Littlepage. I am the VP of Infrastructure and Operations for Digital Globe. And whoa.
They're coming for us.
Yeah, they are. We are not a public sector company. We are a commercial company that provides satellite imagery to a number of different public sector entities ranging from government agencies to NGOs to third-party countries. And it's a cool company in the sense that we've launched our own, we design our satellites, we launch them, we fly them, we keep them in the air, and they're basically giant cameras. So we're taking high-resolution imagery from 700 miles in space, resolving pixels down to about the size of a laptop. And with that, our customers are the ones that I think are doing the really interesting, groundbreaking work. They're the ones that are literally, in some cases, saving lives. They're the first responders to disasters that are happening where imagery could be the difference between life and death for people. And increasingly, what we're finding our business being is not the production of imagery, which is something we've done for 16 years now, but it's the extraction of insights out of that imagery. So it's doing machine learning, it's applying algorithms so that in the case of a hurricane, we can take a before and an after shot and do waterline extraction and understand from the ground and vector information what bridges might be impassable, where the water line has risen to, what might be flooded, how first responders can actually get to people that have needs. And so it's vitally important work. It's something that we're all really passionate about. From an IT standpoint, it's pretty interesting in terms of just a data management challenge. A single image could be 35 gig. We pull down 80 terabytes of imagery a day from the satellite, 10 petabytes a year. We've accumulated 100 petabytes in our imagery library. And some of those images we have to deliver with immediacy in some of the situations I talked about. Some of them might be time series analysis, and so we'll keep them in cheap storage, was tape, now Glacier, where we can extract that information up, pull it up into a usable form, and then put it back into a cheap form later. So a lot of cost management just in terms of how we're managing the cost in, with all that data. So fun stuff.
So I'm Tom Schaeffer, and I'm the guy who gets to follow the guy who shoots rockets into space for satellites. But so I'm the COO, Chief Operating Officer for the state of Minnesota, and cost efficiency panel is an interesting topic for us because the cloud was an opportunity for us to show cost savings to our business customers, which are 70 agencies, boards, and commissions that service all of the citizens of the state of Minnesota. So we oversee many data centers currently and a lot of movement into the cloud right now. And we have, the usual historic infrastructure and operations that you'd expect in any organization. So it's the disruptive technology of cloud has really given us an opportunity to show value to our customer, and not just on cost measure, which is definitely the topic of this panel, but also on a value side of making sure they have what they need to deliver to the citizens. Just to give you some perspective, we used to have 49 data centers. We're down to about 23. And with help from Amazon and other cloud services, we're actually shrinking that on almost a monthly basis, because we have the opportunity and the cost savings that we can do through this model, and truly making it to a situation where moving from large capital outlays to an operational expense model, pay-as-you-go subscription model, and getting a lot of value out of that. So I'm sure we'll get into that more in the panel.
Great. Thanks. John?
I'm John Evans. I'm the Deputy Chief Technology Officer with the Department of Human Resources for the state of Maryland. I'm overseeing a large initiative to set up a platform as a service that will it'll initially be offered to the Health and Human Services agencies within the state of Maryland, but will eventually scale out larger to the entire state of Maryland. The goal, we were funded by CMS last year. We are operating about $70 million a year right now. We are funded for about $200 million over 3 years to create this platform and revamp some of the Health and Human Services applications across the state. The goal is to have a shared data repository and shared analytics across all the departments across state, so we can offer holistic case management. When somebody right now is transitioning between one department to another, even though they still need services, there's a lot of times a poor handoff happening there. So that's one of the main things that we're trying to fix. And we're using AWS as our cloud provider for pretty much, all of our cloud needs are being fulfilled by AWS.
Great, thank you all very much. Yeah, I think one of the things that's really interesting is when mics turn on in mid-sentence. Is you hear the scope and the scale of these organizations. We're talking about millions and millions of dollars, and that's in storage, that's in compute, that's in the other things that Amazon's doing. So for instance, in storage, a lot of times customers will say, well, yeah, 3 cents a gig per month is cheap for S3, and less than 1 cent for Glacier is cheap. But when you think about a 66% savings in millions upon millions of dollars, it has a radical impact, and that's just on one service alone, on storage, and that's within AWS. So from moving from an on-premise environment and the costs associated with that, what do you see as some of the main changes that you've had to adjust to going from that on-premise environment to a cloud environment as it pertains to cost?
Who do you want to go first?
John raised his hand.
Go ahead.
I was going to say one of the biggest things that we came up with initially was the way that we have to budget for the cloud. It made our procurement officers really nervous that we couldn't give them a set amount and predict accurately how much it was going to cost every single month. The fluctuation was something that they were not comfortable with, so we had to teach them and educate them. One of the analogies that I used a lot that seemed to help them a little bit was that cloud is a commodity, it's a utility. I don't have to get a separate work order every time I want to turn on the light switch in my office. Those types of analogies seem to help them a little bit, but it really was a learning curve with them to get them to really understand the differences in budgeting for the cloud versus an on-prem data center. That was the first cost thing that we really came up against.
And I can add on to that because in an earlier session I got a question about this, and it's definitely one of those things that from a cost efficiency, I mentioned it in my intro too, the idea of moving from the CapEx model to the OpEx model and all the purchasing that we used to do up front to buy infrastructure, and then educating our procurement people and our budgeting people to modeling different, how the costs are. And not having these, hopefully, not having these asks for $3, $4, $5 million for refreshing infrastructure in an on-prem data center where you're paying it on a smoother, let's call it. It's not perfect, but it's a smoother model over time instead of having it just be big upfront capital purchases. One other thing that I think is important here too is we're also using this as an opportunity to change how we do business. Because in the end, it is a change in how we procure infrastructure. And getting everybody on board with the idea, the model for that has been an ongoing challenge. It sounds like you had the same problem.
Absolutely.
And making sure that we can get everybody to understand that instead of coming to our business partners and saying, for DR, I need to buy all this infrastructure, buy all this storage that I put into my data center, that'll sit there pretty much idle unless you need it, which again, it's an insurance policy. Now the storage, and to your point, is cheaper definitely going into a Glacier or something like that, just for replicating, and then turning on the compute, and that when we need it, only in that real emergency and not paying for it until then, has been an education for our business partners, when they used to just say, I can't afford DR, I know I want it, but I can't afford it. Now they can actually say, well, if I only have to pay for the storage, and I can have the ability to turn it on when I need it, and I know I have to pay the check then, and they're more than willing to at that point, of course. That's been a change in our relationship with our business. We can deliver a value to them. Now, it's not it was a way outside the realm of possibility to pay for it at that point. Now it's an increase in their budget. But the value that they see of it, they're willing to pay it, which is a great conversation from my perspective. Some of you may have heard me say it before. Our philosophy in Minnesota is partners in performance. We want to make sure that IT is delivering to what our business partners need. And this is one time where IT can actually drive them towards more value and potentially a little bit more cost. But the value side, they totally see why they'd want to do it. So.
Yeah, and for us, it's been an interesting challenge. I like what Tom said about it appearing in some cases more expensive. For us, we have two different aspects of that. One is we don't charge back to our customers. We're an allocation, and we've been an allocation for so long that people don't really see it or think about it. It's just a line item that they see in the budget that they have zero control over. So it's just sort of that tax down at the bottom that people have lived with. And so one aspect of AWS is that in our account structure, while we manage all that storage, that shared family jewels asset for the company within my team, all the compute, everything else is going directly to the business. So it's becoming something that was effectively free in the sense that it was not budgeted for, is now apparent and transparent and not budgeted for. So we're in that transition period where it's like, whoa, what do you mean? I have to pay for this? And it's causing a lot of really good behavior change, which we could talk about later. The other aspect for me, though, is that's been really interesting with my sort of talking about overall spend for what we're doing in the company is we measure ourselves basically on EBITDA. And so for me, I spend a lot of money on refresh capital. We've got about $100 million capital asset base in our data centers. We are incredibly chintzy in terms of that refresh cycle. We run them until the last responsible moment and then use our refresh dollars to refresh things before they die. But the depreciation, the amortization is below the line, so it's not really in my budget. Amazon is. And so I actually have to help our finance organization and our accounting organization understand, well, really, if you compare this to this, it's the same thing, and now we're apportioning costs directly. So again, driving good behavior, but it's actually a really tough sell sometimes because you actually have to get people in to understand what you do for a living. And again, that's a good investment to make, and it's going to help the business in the long run make much better decisions. But that transition period for companies that are making that move from on-prem into AWS, it's a learning experience for everybody.
Yeah, I noticed a theme there in kind of having the conversations with the business. I have a term that I use for that. We call it the Rosetta Stone conversations. So it's, I know how to purchase hardware, I know how to purchase software for a definite period of time. What I don't know is when you tell me RDS costs something per hour, I don't know what that means. And so there's that education piece. When you look back upon your experiences, what are some things that you would share in terms of when to have those discussions with purchasing, maybe with the business as well? And then what are some of the things that you would would do differently and kind of share as a best practice in having those type of conversations?
Well, I'll go first. It's interesting because we've been having these conversations for years. The idea of the cloud isn't a new thing, didn't just come out a couple months ago. So we've been talking to our business about changing from state government perspective. Our procurement people see two things. They see people and they see commodities. They don't see anything else. And Amazon isn't either of those things. So it's been an education for them. So we've been having that conversation for a long time. I really like your analogy where it is the light switch, right? For my data centers, I don't know what my power usage is, generally around the same amount, but it's different every month, right? So I can't budget for it exactly. So we've had that conversation, and with Amazon and cloud services, we've had to have that same conversation with, we got to make sure that we're just fiscally responsible and doing the procurement and doing putting the dollars aside in time. But it's one of those things where having that conversation has at least eased their mind a little bit, that they know it's coming now. When we first started doing this, they were really struggling with the idea of, if I can't see it, can't touch it, and I can't put a name on it, then I can't do it. So it's been a long running conversation, to your point, Blake, that it's definitely something we have to do well ahead of time. You can't get caught behind the curve after you're doing this, because it's really a hard thing to back out of, at least in our organization. After you have kind of moved forward with this model, you definitely need your finance and everybody to be on board before you do it, because we have funny things called 16A letters. We name things after the form numbers from, I don't know, the 60s. But where I get in trouble, and I have stacks of them in my folder. So I don't want to get fired because I didn't follow procurement rules.
I think for us, one of the things, maybe one of the patterns you could potentially follow is we differentiate between things that are shared assets that really for the common good. They belong to the company. They should be managed centrally. We can take cost out and drive efficiency. And those are the things that I continue to do. And I'm sort of absorbing the challenge of variability that comes with that responsibility, and have a large enough budget that we can, generally speaking, kind of slide in roughly at what we budgeted on and explain the deltas. But for everything else, really the most powerful thing in this is we're giving the controls and the decision-making power to turn on and off cost to the product line managers, who are measured on the performance of their product. And so rather than being the reason why they couldn't go to market with something, or the reason why they couldn't deliver, or something like that, now it's here you go. Just consume cycles. Is your product growing faster than you thought it would? That's awesome. Spend more. If it's not, spend less. And so in situations like that, being a for-profit commercial company, in situations where revenue covers the additional cost, there's really no friction. And so it's driving a lot of business velocity. In areas where it's not, or maybe it's not picking up as fast, it's a market test, then those are costs that are being incurred by the business. But those are business decisions, and that's the right place to have that discussion and the right justification to make for those costs. And so it's moving this from a we can't or why can't we to the well, we can, this is the bet we would like to make, yes or no, and get the approval. So I think it's driving great behavior.
Yeah, I think that my experiences largely mirrored what Tom was saying, in terms of the further out that we were able to get talking to these people, the more successful that we were. And if we had waited too long, if we had waited until we actually needed them to start cutting purchase orders and that sort of thing on them, to start training them, it never would have been a success at all. We were very lucky that we had very strong upper leadership buy-in on it, on the transition to the cloud. It was sort of mandated, find a way to do it. It's not a choice. So we were very lucky in that respect. They weren't able to push back potentially as much as I've heard from some of my colleagues when I've talked to them about it. Sometimes it almost seems like procurement runs the show a little bit. Luckily, that wasn't able to happen with us because we had really good upper leadership buy-in. And we were able to look at the total ROI, not just in terms of data center versus cloud expenditures. We were able to look at the ROI of things like the automation of like a CI/CD pipeline and some of those types of things that would cut down on staff needs and also provide additional efficiencies for the staff, which would enable them to then be able to provide better services back to the constituents. So it was good for us that we had the leadership buy-in, because really all those things were able to tie together and be presented as a holistic picture to our procurement groups.
Can I add one more thing that kind of goes with both of what they were saying? It has made a change in our way of doing business. Historically, especially in the storage area, which is an easy one to measure, you have to always have headroom. And then you'd ask your business partners, how fast is your data going to grow? And they would guess with no real analytics to say what it was. So you'd always have to give 20-25% headroom. And because of procurement, which I know you and I both have these struggles for procurement, you'd always have to buy extra and leave it on the floor for the need as it came around. By going this direction, we have, I'll say, infinite expansion possibility as needed. So if you have a legislation in the state of Minnesota that makes us collect more data for some reason, we don't have to go and procure another storage array or another way to store that. We just kind of crank up the bill over time as we gather the data. So it ramps up gradually instead of a big procurement. And then to your point, definitely it has driven some conversations about, do I need that still? I can actually make a decision to purge data, archive data, potentially to a cheaper storage model, but maybe even get rid of data. But periodically we do that. And then the cost goes away. Where if I bought a storage array, the cost doesn't go away. Right. It's a huge savings for them. So it's one of those things that the business can actually make business decisions based on cost that they've never had the ability to do before.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. I've talked to several customers that look at me and say, so capacity management is just something I inherit from AWS. I don't have to think about it and consider it. That's amazing. And that's something that, that's kind of inherent in the cloud model, that's a piece of what we do. I think that the other point that was really interesting, Jay, you brought up the point that the increase in revenue justifies it. So as your business grows, you're obviously making more money. And I've talked to customers that say, actually the more our AWS bill goes up, the happier we get, because that means that we're generating more revenue into the business, and we have it optimized to a point that we can use that as one of our KPIs, right? Yeah. AWS bill is up, business is up, we're good. I'd love to hear from the state government side, what does that look like? Let's say you're bumping into a 1-year budget cycle. So how does that kind of affect things? And are you able to make those type of discussions, with your budget office and saying, hey, we may need additional money for this. We don't know. What do those type of things look like when it's not a situation of being able to generate additional revenue to justify the additional cost?
Sure. So I think it goes back a little bit to what I was talking about before. We're not a revenue generating agency, and we haven't really, the long-term goal once we have the platform set up is to turn over the AWS platform over to our Department of IT, at which point there will be a services catalog developed, and they'll have kind of, I think what you were talking about with selling it back to the different departments within the state. We're not at that point yet. We don't have that model. So for us, it's really about, it's not about generating money, it's about saving money and creating efficiencies and providing better services to our constituents. Yeah. So largely what we've found is that efficiencies can be translated in two ways. One, it's either there's a cost savings associated with it, or it provides our workers more time to be able to provide something of value to our constituents, whether it's on the IT side, building something that will help them access their benefits faster, or whether it's direct interaction with them. So for us, it's not so much, it's a little bit different. We're not at a cost generating model yet, but cost is still very important from an ROI standpoint. And to the other part of your question, luckily, we haven't had to go back and ask for more money yet, so so I don't really know how to answer that one.
Yeah. You are lucky.
Yeah,
So John and I come at this from different angles from state perspective because I am the IT organization, right? So, I mean, you're more what we call the agency-based.
Yep.
And so we are a chargeback organization, but we're a zero-sum game. We're not for profit. But we do have those conversations with our business partners when they have a need. Again, back to like I was saying before, when the legislature says that they have to do something that involves IT, we do have those conversations with them and trying to give them enough data to be able to make good business decisions, cost-based decisions. And we have some federal regulations that make it so we can't go to the cloud. So we get to have that conversation about whether we can go to the cloud or can't go to the cloud with some of their data. So it actually gives us an ability to have a conversation that is a little separate from the cost side of the world, but it's getting back to their federal funding authority, CMS is in your case, about helping them maybe change some of their regulations so that we could start moving in the direction of the cloud. And we can have that then talking about how the cost difference would be if we had to do it on-prem versus doing it in a cloud, potential scenario. So it's changed the conversation. It's not based, we don't have the linear curve of more is better for us, but it is a business value conversation that I think we're trying to have. And from our perspective, the goal of Minnesota IT Services, my organization, is to have that conversation more than it's just going to cost you more conversation, which is the history of how IT's always been. So having that value conversation is definitely what we're trying to do.
And to your point about the federal funding authority for us, luckily CMS has a good amount of data already in Amazon, so that was an easier conversation for us to have with them. They've got petabytes of PII data, PHI data already in Amazon, so that was actually one of the concerns that we had initially was how are they going to react to us wanting to put this data into Amazon. They had really no problem with it. As long as it's secured properly, it was fine. And one of the other things that they like to see, one of the waivers that we have applied for, we have to show a direct cost savings for any dollar. They're willing to give you money up front, but then you show a direct cost savings to them on the back end. And since they fund the majority of our programs and the majority of our people, that even things like efficiencies from the worker standpoint or hard costs associated with transferring out of a data center, both of those can be associated with it. So it actually means some injection of funds to the state that we can then show that will save CMS later on. So when you touched on that, just made me think of it.
Excellent. Yeah, and if they need any help backing an 18-wheeler up to their data centers to get that stuff out, we might be able to find someone that can help you.
Got a snowmobile?
Maybe. And someone who's an expert at setting it up. So when we're looking at cost, one of the prevalent themes in cloud is that really cost becomes everyone's problem or everyone's opportunity. So in a traditional on-premise environment, cost really is the domain of a couple people who pay for things. So when a budget's put out there, you decide how much equipment you're going to buy, how many people you're going to hire, et cetera. A developer rarely cares about cost. Your networking team rarely cares much about cost. Security has a very specific focus that doesn't require cost. When you think about people in the cloud environment, how are you having to change the way that you do business around people, and how does that impact cost? So from training, hiring, importing skills, et cetera, how does your people model in the cloud differ from on-premise?
I'll go ahead and start on that. I think a cost transition like that and the awareness of cost is actually a culture change. And the thing that we had to move from with my team is the value that a person brings to a company is not their ability to go out and acquire something and build run sheets and get it into a data center and light it up and be done with it. It's really instantiating a service, and it's understanding how that surface or that service operates and what it consumes and how you measure it and how you make it more efficient. I don't think it's Amazon's responsibility to do capacity planning. I think that is literally the words I use to describe what a network engineer's job is now. It's capacity management. It's understanding how it's being consumed by our customers. It's understanding whether you are constraining the business in any way, through starting to have packet loss. And it's managing that as something that is long-term. And that's just a mindset change. And I've had to approach that kind of in a stepwise function. But some people are kind of making that transition and thinking about how they value what they bring in a way that allows them to really invest in that and understand that new knowledge and focus in on it. And if you get that, then the rest is actually pretty easy.
Yeah, from the state of Minnesota's perspective, we're trying to give more data to the people who use the system. In our earlier session, we talked about how we're going to DevOps and using the cloud for more of spinning up development environments or test environments or build environments. And giving people that you mentioned before don't usually have to deal with cost. It's just a commodity they use. But giving them the ability to understand that if you only run that build server for 5 minutes instead of 55 minutes, it'll save you money. Where you might want a bigger instance to be able to do things faster because it actually saves you money. And giving them the ability to see that and make business decisions based on it. And I say business decisions, but it's really an IT, making an IT decision to help the business in the end. So giving some more of that transparency, some more data to people, and then using automation tools to check what would this cost if I ran it in AWS or another cloud or on-prem to be able to make those decisions, and automating turning things off at night when they're not running for a development environment. I told the story in an earlier session, but I worked for a cloud company before I came back to the state of Minnesota, and cloud chaos happened when a lot of developers turned up development environments and were doing really good things during the day, but never turned them off at night, right? So we had all kinds of instances running that we were paying for that were of no value. They were just cost. So what we put in place in Minnesota is giving that ability to have them automatically turn off or know what they're going to cost so that you can make decisions on it and not have to be paying for things that are really not adding value to the organization. And again, back to an earlier comment that our data center, we didn't have that ability. It just ran, it was on, right? So now we have that ability that we can actually manage costs through it.
Yeah, I would say it's pretty similar to what Tom was saying for us. The increase in data, the transparency, and filtering that data down to lower levels, really empowering decision making at the right level. It's gotten, not only do people who didn't have to worry about costs before, now they're aware of the costs, but we actually have them making some decisions around the cost much more so than they would have in a traditional data center environment. We had similar types of things happening where environments would be spun up and they would sit idle and no one would catch them. I'm trying to remember, there was one case actually, I can't remember the feature that was running on AWS, but it was something that was charging us a lot of money. And
isn't it fun to catch those in the bill?
Yeah, I can't remember what it was now, but somebody, it came up and I was like, what is this money? And I actually one of my guys had to sit with me and we went through and he's like, oh, someone turned this feature on and it's been running for a month now and no one's used it. So we've had those types of things too now. Automation has helped us a lot with overcoming those types of issues. There was a kind of second part to your question about kind of resource management. How do you, with kind of transitioning the people to accept their new roles a little bit. So far we've been operating largely off of a contractor model, because we don't really have the in-house staff who's aware of how to run AWS, so it's been very costly for us to get the talent. The model that we're going off though is we have people shadowing, we have in-house people shadowing the contractors a lot of the times, even having just informative sessions with the contractors. At first, there was some talk that it was maybe a little bit of waste of money because they're not being productive on their own during that time, but we think it's going to have good cost savings down the line when we can transition off the contractor model, really stick with more of our in-house folks. It's also going to keep those people employed and keep the jobs with the state. So,
let me add on to that because the training is so important. It's important that we get people trained to be able to do the work because this is different work. It's not just infrastructure and operations work anymore. There's a lot of difference to it. A lot of infrastructure people like myself came up through the ranks and never really understand coding, and infrastructure's become a code base now. It's not the same thing, so it's a lot of training. So for the state of Minnesota, doing a similar thing to what you're saying is having my staff working with some of the contractors that we've got in to do this work. But also, we're putting together training plans using tools, online training, to make sure people are tooled to do this new job that they're doing. And it's giving people a lot of excitement about learning new things, but it's scaring a lot of people too. It changes what they do. I tell everybody, I probably say this 5 times a day, I got more work than you know what to do with. Don't worry about it. But it's change. So, but we've had to invest in training, and that's important to us. We want to make sure that our staff are capable of doing this work. But in the end, that investment will pay dividends. So.
Yeah, we're doing something very similar in both cases. One is, we are flying our latest satellite on microservices architecture, and that's one of those things that it has to just work, and it has to work at a specific time when you have a launch slot. And in order to make sure we did that, we brought in third parties, and so we learned by doing alongside people that really knew how to do it and set that pattern, and then we have actually completed the process of replacing them with our own folks. And training comes with that. Last year, we rewarded the people who took the initiative to do the AWS certifications. So you got to go to reInvent. This year, I've got enough people in IT that have certifications I can't afford to actually do that. So it's a good problem to have, but those two things really go hand in hand.
Yeah. Excellent. And I heard a couple of them, but if we could just go back real quick, there are some strategies that you mentioned for cost savings. One of the innovative ones that I heard from a customer was their development environments, like not just turn them off at night, but tie them into your badge. So when the developer shows up to work and they scan in, it fires up their environment. When they go to lunch or go home, it turns it off. If they don't show up for 4 days, it never comes on. Are there some things like that you have that are now codified or policies, or just even practices that you can recommend to folks in the audience that are kind of bona fide cost savings or cost avoidance opportunities?
I mean, we don't really have anything codified into policy at this point, other than, I guess, some data retention type policies where when we can shift it into cold storage and when we can eliminate it altogether. That does relate to cost savings because once we shift into cold storage, it's about 1/3 of the price, I believe, from the immediate access type storage. So that does translate some into cost savings. But other than that, we don't really have a lot of codified policies around it. We do have some practices that we're trying to implement, kind of what you were talking about around if environment is up but not being used, it automatically goes back down after they're done using it. Our CI/CD pipeline really kind of defines a lot of those types of practices. We're also trying to make use right now. We're kind of in the infancy stages, but trying to make use of spot instances. So we'll have on-demand instances, an auto-scaling group, and an auto-scaling group around spot instances, and put an elastic load balancer between them. And then when additional instances are needed, it can scale up either one as long as the price is right there. So those are just some of the things that we've still very much in their infancy that we're kind of talking through still, starting to put into place. But we're not as mature as we'd like to be in some of those areas, but we do have some ideas and starting to implement them.
Go ahead.
Well, John used a good turn of phrase, practices instead of policies, and I think that's really important. We're trying to make things really easy for people to do the right thing, and then have the system consume the resources appropriately. We're a 24/7 operation. Some of the more interesting places in the world are in the middle of the night, our time, and so we have to keep the operation running. And the only way you get code into our production environment is pushing it through the CI/CD pipeline. So we actually have to go from dev into, kind of the acceptance testing and into production at any time. And so the environments are up, but we're creating so much value out of the pipeline itself that we're training our internal customers, our developers, to use it and consume it as a service, and that service is going to make sure that they're using the right image, it's secure, it's going right into an appropriate auto-scaling group. That auto-scaling group is going to take care of consumption-based, bringing it up, bringing it down as appropriate. And so we're trying to do this through practice and creating value, as opposed to saying the policy shall be, don't do this. That not only doesn't always work, but it kind of sends the wrong message in terms of empowerment of the developers, and we want to move in that direction much more strongly.
Yeah, so we also, kind of like both of you said, policy isn't really the way we're going in that. We are trying to do practices. And I would say we're kind of in the infancy too, and I'm going to steal the whole card thing. I'm going to do that. But we do have time-based, instances, and we do have, checking if they're being accessed and turning them off if they're not. So kind of managing costs that way. But I think we want to mature in that area, and it's definitely a place where if you can find a way, the worst way to find out about something that's run too long is in the bill.
Absolutely.
That's the worst way to find out.
It makes for a fun track down stage.
Well, it's yeah, if you like playing MacGyver and figuring stuff out, that's a fun way to do it. But you don't want to be that guy that has to go to the business and say, yeah, we forgot to turn something off and here's your $10,000 bill.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's one of the new roles, I guess, that we're starting to see as a result of people moving to the cloud is something called a cost optimization engineer, which, in some cases it was literally the person who used to rack and stack servers and in the network, in the data center, and they said, well, obviously this person needs to be upskilled, provided with new training on how to do that. And now what they do is they go in and learn how to monitor the environment, so immediately if a server is spun up that is out of compliance or doesn't have the appropriate tagging in place, so that you know exactly what's coming on and you're monitoring it on an ongoing basis. And really, the idea of that person is just to save money and consistently be monitoring to save money for the organization. So it's an interesting way to utilize existing personnel, upskill them, give them higher level skills as well.
Yeah, and we have some automated tools in place that help us with some stuff like that. Like, we use like Trusted Advisor, and there's some cloud checker type of utilities that you can run that will help you with that type of thing also. So,
excellent. Yeah, and so Cloud Checker and similar services can actually give you ideas on RIs, right? What are the reserved instances that you need to be looking at to purchase in order to save 40, 60% moving forward?
Absolutely.
Before we get into the Q&A, there's a lot of different things that go into making the decision to move to the cloud. Where was cost in the very early discussions of whether or not you should move to the cloud? And at this stage in discussions and migration and where you are, where does cost fall in line in terms of what's most important about going to the cloud?
I'll go first. So I'll tell you, I was skeptical at first that this would be a cost savings. I mean, I really struggled with the idea of, could we manage to the level that we've been talking about for the last 40 minutes to manage the cost of cloud and not have it become the thing that costs more in the end? I think some of the things that we've put in place to check and to govern the cloud has helped with this. But I'll tell you, I was skeptical at first. Definitely on board with the idea. Actually, I've been a huge advocate for the cloud because I think that there's beyond cost, there was a ton of other value. But I would say now that we've jumped in with both feet, we're finding the value, or the cost, and the value that we thought was there is actually bigger than we thought, not just the cost savings. I mentioned it before. In some places, we're spending more money, but the value for our business is just through the roof. And it might not be cheaper to the point of cost efficiency, but we're getting things that we never got before.
Yeah, for us, it's a real simple answer to your question of where did cost fit into the decision. It didn't. It was not even something we discussed. It was all about business velocity. It was growth. It was where our customers are. It was creating a network effect by bringing more information, be it imagery or algorithms, into the same place where they could be used to create more value, and that has been the focus. I'm not sure cost savings is the right way to think about this. It really is cost optimization. It's what you talked about, cost optimization engineer, and I know Allison's over there in the corner saying that's my new business title. She's probably ordering business cards right now.
You're welcome.
But it really is an optimization, and I think that's part of the discussion you need to have with the business. If you try to sell AWS as cost savings, you may find, as I am proving actually, that in aggregate it's more expensive. But it's more expensive for the right reason. It's like your metric of, if I see my AWS costs go up, I know goodness is happening. And I think it really, that optimization is the word that we all need to be thinking about and internalizing ourselves as we move forward with that. And then getting back to your question, it really isn't the reason why you go to AWS.
So my experience is actually a little bit different in this one. One of the main reasons why we went to AWS was for the cost savings. That was one of the main reasons. That was one of the main ways that we got approval to proceed with our project, was the ROI that we were able to show. And to be fair, I think a lot of it is because our existing data center costs were so high. We had a vendor that was charging us a very large amount of money to manage our data centers for us. I'm trying to be kind here. So, it was one of the primary reasons why we got the green light to move forward with our project, was the cost savings that we were able to show versus our data center costs with the vendor.
Excellent. Great, thank you all. We've got a couple minutes left. I promised you an opportunity for Q&A. Is there anybody that has a good question that you think would be pertinent to a lot of people in the room and broadly enough to cover the different panelists? Okay, we've got one in the back. Is there a mic? Okay. So I'll just filibuster as she gets back there, I guess.
I don't know. Yeah, it's on.
Very good.
John, you said something interesting in the beginning about not able to show accurate estimates, but yet flip that to where you were able to, prove that going to the cloud was going to show great ROI. How did you kind of bridge that gap of, did you do some modeling on the estimates, or you just said, you know what, we pay so much now that it's just going to be cheaper? I mean, how did you get the folks over the edge of that one?
Part of it was, if we're paying this much now, it's got to be cheaper. But no, but really, it was, what I was more referring to was over the long one, we can relatively estimate what the costs are going to be, but I can't accurately tell you every month what those costs are going to be. So not having a fixed amount for my procurement people to say, this is how much we're going to pay every single month, that's kind of what made them nervous. And that's also, to be fair, that's what made them nervous about my long-term cost projections. The long-term cost projections, they kind of had the same questions. Well, how do you know these are accurate if you can't tell me that every month what it's going to be? But when you're talking long-term, it's easier to have things kind of aggregate, and there's some smoothing effect that you see over a longer term. Whereas if you look at it month to month, it could be jagged, but over the long term, you can create some sort of mean linear line, some sort of mean cost that goes through that gets you to an endpoint. And that's easier from a budgeting standpoint, I find, than trying to actually say, well, this is how I'm going to spend in April, and then May, and then June. So does that answer? Or?
Yes, thank you.
No problem, thank you.
Hello. From a contractual perspective, have you encountered the reserve instance option, or have you just been on demand mostly?
We're exploring reserved instances. It's actually looking like it may be likely now, or it's getting to look like a higher probability that we may have some level of reserved instances to kind of cover our baseline, and then use on demand auto scaling groups for anything that goes beyond that.
So being from the Department of the Navy, and we're kind of held to the FedRAMP approval process and the DoD PA process, are you experiencing any kind of bumps in the road as far as the service utilization that you guys are using within AWS today. And that goes back to your reserved instances and your EC2 and your auto-scaling experience.
Bumps in the road, I'm sorry. What do you mean by?
So for us on the Navy side, we have huge procurement hurdles to get through to be able to even use a lot of the AWS services that are available in the commercial sector. Specifically when you go to east-west. And it gets much more even complicated once you go to GovCloud. So I was wondering if you guys are experiencing anything, and I know it's not really truly related to cost, but in a way it really is, because I think that you guys are more in the east-west region as opposed to in the GovCloud region, where we would experience a higher cost on our side than you would within the pure public.
Yeah, so we are not going GovCloud. GovCloud only helps if you have ITAR requirements.
Right.
So we're not.
Or HIPAA or PII or.
No, even those, it doesn't matter. GovCloud doesn't help you for HIPAA, PII, any of that. GovCloud only helps you if you have ITAR requirements.
So what? In our world, are you guys doing IL2 or IL4? So we're restricted on hosting data within an IL2 environment. We have to go to an IL4 environment, which is a higher risk assessment. And GovCloud is actually the IL4 environment that we're bound to today. We're trying to push the envelope, but.
Yeah, we don't have that type of requirement specifically. We have, we still look at FSMA moderate, we still look at HIPAA, we look at IRS Pub 1075, we look at all those types of things, but you can achieve any of those levels of security on regular AWS. The only difference between GovCloud and regular AWS is that GovCloud is fully managed by US citizens.
Right.
And so it meets ITAR requirements. But I can meet any of those levels of security in the regular east-west regions. I don't need to go to GovCloud to meet any level of security.
So do you mind after this if I get your point of contact information? We are working on a white paper right now for the Department of Navy, Department of Defense, CIO, in order for us to actually break that barrier and go pure public in east-west. We have gone through and done a complete deep dive, and my guys are working right now trying to get with AWS and some of the commercial customers that they're using today that are actually doing that today. So can we possibly meet right after this?
I'd love to do that. It's something
Okay.
I'm very, very interested in. Love to do it.
Awesome.
Yeah, the only reason I know so much about GovCloud is one of my best friends, one of my shooting buddies, is the manager at AWS for GovCloud. So that's the only reason. That's the only reason I know so much about
Actually,
it. So.
one really important point out of all that that shouldn't be lost is what you can do in a commercial region is pretty much everything, including ITAR. We have ITAR
That's true.
requirements ourselves, and so, when I have first suggested let's run in the commercial region, I got we can't ITAR. It's like, well, what's the ITAR data? Well, and you start peeling the onion on that, and you get down to, for us, a very, very small, very important part of our process. So we're working to basically handle that in an encrypted method and to get the approval to actually do that. But everything we can possibly do, except the things that we, for some legitimate reason, can't, we're doing in a commercial region because it's cheaper.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's exactly the reason why we're looking to do it too. I mean, we've even gone so far as to decompose that broad description of PII down to the, I don't want to say the gnat's ass, but really we've gone down to that level to ensure that anything CUI and all of that needs to go behind the extra protection is going to extra protection, but all the other stuff, that miscellaneous stuff, sure, why not? So I would love to meet
Great.
you guys.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Thank you very much. So for everyone in attendance, I really apologize. Hopefully you can track down our panelists. Just to prove to you guys that they were legit, I asked one question that we had actually talked about, and everything else was off the cuff, and I can show you my notes here. So everything that they mentioned today just came from the heart. It's from their real experiences and just from their willingness to go through this. So thank you all very much to the panelists.
Thank you.
And enjoy the rest of the summit.